Okay, this is a new video for you. It relates to 1.1.3 of the specification, which is entitled The Economic Problem. And we're going to look at the first bullet point, which is called the problem of scarcity, where there are unlimited wants and finite resources. So let's start off by trying to pin down this term scarcity. Scarcity exists when there's not enough of something to go around. A good or a service is scarce if the demand for it at a price of zero is greater than the available supply. So let's take an example or some examples of scarcity. Diamonds are scarce. There's lots of people who would like to have a diamond, especially if they were free of charge, way more than the available supply. On the other hand, you could look at seawater. Seawater is limited, but it's not scarce. If we were all to go down to Brighton with a bucket and take away as much seawater as we wanted, there would be plenty enough available for other people. So seawater isn't scarce, diamonds are. Let's take some other examples. Ferrari sports cars, I would say they're scarce. If they were available free of charge, far more people would want to own a Ferrari than there are Ferraris available. So they're scarce. There's not enough Ferraris to go around to meet people's wants for Ferraris. The same also applies to my local state sixth form college. Places at that college are very scarce, highly scarce, because there are far more people who want to attend the college than there are places available. So again, there's not enough of this service, in this case called education, at this particular college to go around. However, there are some other schools in my locality where there isn't scarcity. In one of those schools, there's 800 places a year. Or no, that's wrong. About 100 places a year, and maybe only 60 students a year want to go to that school. So there's more than enough places. So there's no scarcity issue there. So not everything is scarce. Scarcity only exists when there's not enough of something to go around. Okay, time. I think that's a good example of something that is scarce, certainly for me. There are only 7 days in a week and only 24 hours in a day. There's not enough time available for me to do everything that I might want to do. For example, if I choose to spend my time teaching on Zoom 24/7, I won't have any time available to make economics videos. So my time is scarce because there's not enough of it to go around to do all of the things that I might possibly want to do in the amount of time that I've got. So time is scarce. That's why you should never waste it. Scarcity also applies to money. We do not and have not enough money or wealth to satisfy our every desire, everything that we want. I think it's important at this point as well to distinguish between scarcity and poverty. Scarcity occurs amongst poor people and amongst the rich. It applies to everybody because there'll never be enough of everything that people want to go around at a zero price. And because there's no limits on a person's time, even the richest person on earth will still have unfulfilled wants. They'll still have itches that they would like to scratch. If the world was such that everyone could have as much of everything as they desired without having to sacrifice anything, then economics, it wouldn't really exist, or it wouldn't exist as a subject that's worth studying. So we're really interested in scarcity in economics. Austrian economists, the likes of Mises, would say that economics really is a study of human action, which is purposeful behaviour. Scarcity forces each of us to make decisions because we can't have all that we want. Again, to quote Mises, the great Austrian economist, Economics is not about goods and services, it's about human choice and action. So in essence then, it's about choices that are brought on by scarcity. We make decisions, choices, every single day of our lives, and they involve choosing what we want to do for a living, where we want to live, what things we want to buy with our limited incomes, and maybe indeed how best to spend our limited lifespans here on planet Earth. We live in a world of scarcity, and we have to acknowledge that. If we do one thing, scarcity means that often involves giving something else up. Okay, let's turn our attention to the next topic, which is the idea of unlimited wants. Economists correctly assume that human beings are rational utility maximizers. Let's pin some of this stuff down. So rational means that we actually think about what we're doing. We don't do things at random. We're thinking, sentient beings. We're not like decapitated chickens running around randomly. Utility is just a fancy word used by economists to describe the pleasure that we gain from doing something that we want to do. So to say that economists assume that we're rational utility maximizers, if you want to break that down, what it really means is that we're sensible people, we're not into self-harming ourselves, and what we try to do is to live our lives in a manner that will give us the most pleasure, which from my perspective doesn't seem too much like an outlandish assumption. It's pretty much what I can see, and it's pretty much describes my own behavior. So thinking about unlimited wants, I think what you could also say is that when faced with a choice between consuming more goods and services or fewer goods and services, we'll typically opt to consume more, especially if we can obtain those extra goods at no extra costs. You just have to sort of see the behavior of people once they've paid their fixed price to eat in an all-you-can-eat buffet. They'll, as soon as they've paid that money up front, there can be some Herculean acts of eating that you can observe. Another example, if you think about bankers and maybe footballers, you can see unlimited wants there. A banker, they might already have a 5-bedroomed house with a swimming pool, but it's not enough. They'll also want maybe a bigger house with an extra bedroom in, and maybe a tennis court. Footballers, if you go to the car parks of Premier League clubs, they're chock-a-block full of expensive vehicles. And if you had, for example, as a sixth former, you might be bought a nice blue BMW Mini for your 17th birthday, just passed your test. If somebody was to offer you a red BMW Mini, maybe a convertible for when it's sunny in Britain, free of charge, would you turn it down? Probably not. So I think, again, this assumption that economists make about us all having unlimited wants isn't an outlandish assumption to make at all. Economists are right to conclude that our wants are unlimited. We always prefer more to less. Just as a digression, some people, I think mostly lefties, they talk about, they get confused about wants and needs. So I think what you could say is that maybe a need describes a want that has to be satisfied to sustain life. So you could talk about the need for clean water, food, shelter, warmth. Yeah, those things are all needed to sustain life. But there are also wants too. Yeah, and I think the word, need, it's quite loose really, and we should avoid it in economics and instead refer to things that we want as wants. Okay, so let's move on. So we've covered the idea of unlimited wants. When faced with the choice between more or less, we'll typically choose more, especially if we can get more without having to pay a price for that. Okay, so finite resources. So resources are needed to produce goods and services, and economists refer to these resources as factors of production. So that's something you definitely, it's a really important phrase in economics, factors of production, and it describes the resources that are needed to produce goods and services. And there are 4 factors of production. So again, you need to know this, it's really important. So the first factor of production, is called land. And it's not just land, it includes anything that comes from land, anything that can be extracted from the land. So natural resources such as water, oil, copper, gas, coal, timber, even fish, is called land because it's extracted from the land. The amount of land on planet Earth, as we know, is finite, it's limited. So that means that production is also constrained by shortages of land. From an educational perspective, land would be needed to site a school. You need a place to put the school, build it. But also you would need land-based resources in the form of fossil fuels, especially during the winter, the long, cold, dark British winter, for heating and lighting the school. So the fossil fuels needed would be an example of land. Okay, the second factor of production is labour. Obviously, to produce goods and services, workers are needed. So in the context of education, to provide that service, you would need to employ workers called teachers to supply this service called education. What's quite interesting at the moment is, well, not at the moment, I guess over the last 30 years, is developments in artificial intelligence has greatly reduced the demand for labour. So if you went into a car factory 30 years ago, you would just see hundreds and hundreds of people on a production line producing cars in quite a labour intensive method of production. These days things have moved on. There'll be fewer people knocking about the place and more machines. This brings us on to the third factor of production, which is called capital. Capital is any machine or fixed asset. So in an educational context, an example of capital might be a teacher's whiteboard or their computer. In the car factory, capital might be a computer-aided manufacturing robot. In a supermarket, it might be a laser scanner. Capital is used by labour to process raw materials into finished products, or it's used by labour to help labour supply a service. Okay, the last factor of production is entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurs are people who risk everything and set up businesses, private businesses. Entrepreneurs purchase land, labour and capital, and they do that to, as I say, to set up a business, and businesses produce goods and services that consumers voluntarily choose to buy. It's risky setting up a business because an entrepreneur has got to pay money to the owners of the factors of production that they want to use in their business. So if you want labour, and by the way, we don't have slavery in Britain in 2020, so if you want labour, you've got to pay for it, and that factor payment to labour is called wages. So that's really important that you know that. The factor payment to labour is called wages. If you want to use land that belongs to somebody else, you have to pay rent. So the factor payment made to land is rent. Make sure you know Capital goods, such as those computer-aided robots that I referred to earlier in car factories, are very, very expensive. The money that's tied up in capital, machinery, it could be in a bank earning the entrepreneur interest. For those entrepreneurs that don't have cash in the bank, many of them borrow money to purchase the capital that they need to set their businesses up. Therefore, the factor payment that flows to capital is called interest. Yeah, so one more time, the factor payment that flows to capital is called interest. Yeah. Now, in return for risking everything, setting up a business, the entrepreneur, they receive a factor income too, and that factor income is called profit. So profit is the reward for risk. It's the reward for the entrepreneur's energy in setting up the business and working within it. So yeah, those are the four factors of production: land, labour, capital, and enterprise, the entrepreneurship. And the four factors of factor payments. Factor payment to labour is called wages. The factor payment to capital is called interest. Factor payment to land is called rent. Factor payment to the entrepreneur is called profit. Okay, so in conclusion, let's round this up. We've established that human beings have got unlimited wants. When faced with a choice between more or less, we'll typically choose more. Thank you very much. However, to produce goods and services that we have unlimited wants for requires resources, these things called factors of production. But those resources are finite. There's only so much iron ore on the planet. In the short run, there's only so many workers in the UK. There's only so much land available. So we've got a problem because finite resources means that the output of goods and services are also limited. Finite resources equals finite output. But on the other side of the equation, as consumers, we've got unlimited wants. So that then forces all societies to make some tough choices because our wants are unlimited, but the resources needed to satisfy these wants are finite. So all societies have choices to make, and we'll talk more about those choices in the next lesson. Thank you for listening, and make sure you make some good notes on this. Thank you.